Good afternoon, Brian.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good.
Good.
Did my run to town and I'm back now, so ready to focus.
Ready to buckle down for a couple weeks. Um, so something popped up in the news recently that I'm sure caught your attention too, and I thought we need to talk about it. Um, the the headlines I saw, and I'll be honest, I didn't like look deeply into what's happening legislatively, but the headlines are that um Joe Rogan let um, RFK Jr. and Donald Trump know that ibogaine was being used successfully to treat PTSD, and we should create an easy pathway for psychedelics to be used therapeutically in the mainstream, in the medical community, something like that.
Mhm, mhm.
And I'm all for treating PTSD, and I actually think psychedelics could have a really play a leading role in doing that, but not like that. At least that's my reaction, and I suspect yours is similar. And I think there are like a
Yeah.
couple of practical things we can do with that. Like I think there's an opportunity here for us to kind of make a case for why not, and how could it be done instead, maybe. But then the
Mhm.
thought experiment I've been playing with is like, what could somebody say to somebody sitting in RFK Jr.'s seat to convince them that there might be a better way? And that's where I'm really tripping over myself because when I talk to, let's say, uninitiated proponents of psychedelic therapy, they really don't. I haven't been able to get the point across in a way that it's adequately received. And I
Right,
think I
right.
might be able to even steelman the counter argument if we get there. But
Uh-huh.
first, what are your initial reactions?
Well, my initial response is that the devil is in the details. And as is so often the case, we get pushed low resolution models of things because the reality is messier than anybody wants to really go into. So that's my suspicion of what's going on here. Uh, I think that the pithy conversation to have really is that maybe how we approach these things and what our expectations might be when we do so are really highly based on our Weltanschauung, our world perspective. How, life, the universe, and everything. How do we think things really work? And because that will lead us to make certain assumptions about these things and how we deal with them. Uh, my feeling is that you've got two very strong influences here. One is and maybe I would call it an honest mistake, and one I would call a dishonest mistake. The honest mistake is if you are a reductive materialist or a material reductivist, then you're really into stuff. And you really think that stuff is the answer if we only had the right stuff. And
Here we're
tends to
referring to neurons as stuff and um neurotransmitters probably more to the point as stuff and influencing that stuff with molecules
the answer
affect.
is in matter.
Yeah.
The reason that you're experiencing what you're experiencing is because of your serotonin levels and because of your hardware. It's basically so then the answer we're going to look for is going to be in the hardware. And we're going to look for a magic bullet is the way this is usually described. And we wanna just give you the pill and have the pill do the work, and we're very used to trusting the pill when we don't even know how the pill works. And we in some cases, we might even not even know have an honest feedback about whether or not the pill works. And I'm not talking about any particular pill. I'm certainly not talking about birth control. I'm talking about any materialist solution to a mental circumstance. In other words, there is an assumption that is taken on about the relationship between the matter and the mind. And the current rage is to say that it's all matter and mind is entirely dependent on matter. Now, it's certainly true that mind goes through matter, and I think that it doesn't you don't need psychedelics to see that. You can bugger up the hardware. Most people experience this on all fours at some point in their college or college aged years. If you're smart, you do this by watching someone else on all fours. If you're gotta pee on the electric fence to believe it sort of a person, then you've got to know for yourself, and then it'll be you on all fours. But you realize that, okay, my perception of reality is definitely altered here. My ability to interact with reality is altered, and it's all due to my messing up the hardware here. We talked about the inside and the outside, and the relationship between the inside and the outside, and we've clearly see that we can mess up the body and affect the perceptions of the mind. So I'm not going to argue about that.
So that's the
What
honest mistake.
That's the honest mistake. Now, what people don't realize is the degree to which the flow goes the other way, which has also been confirmed by materialist science. For example, if someone is struck blind or is deaf, the part of the brain that was devoted to vision or to hearing will pretty rapidly get colonized by other brain functions. It's like we got processing power that the hardware, the plug and play is unplugged. So we're going to use that processing power to these other functions that we know are plugged. And the point here is that the usage of the brain, which I know a determinist with their uncashable promissory note would tell you that, well, this is all just determined. But we know that the development of the brain is directly connected to the usage of the brain. Go start learning to play the violin. Your brain will change. Bind your eyes up for 24 hours. Your brain will change. A current theory I just heard is that the reason we dream is to keep the visual cortex devoted to vision, because such a long period of it being offline means the rest of the brain might try to colonize it over to its own purposes. And so this is a way of keeping the motor idling until we wake up and let the clutch out again. And
To me,
I
that
didn't
sounds a little materialist, reductivist to me,
well,
but go on.
it is, which is why it's even proves my point better, is that even for the materialist reductionist, we know the flow goes both ways. If you want to argue mind is an epiphenomenon of the brain, it seems like there's a lot of evidence to say that the brain becomes an epiphenomenon of the mind that uses it if the usage can determine the actual structure that much. In other words, your brain is a lot more alive and responsive to the way you use it than you tend to think or are culturally taught. So, all that is preface, is preamble to what my experience, which is definitely more extensive, I think, than the average person's experience in these dimensions.
Wait, did you hit
Is
what the dishonest mistake is too?
Well, we're getting there.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But so what I was going to say is my experience is that it's a tool. It works as a tool. And if you go to Home Depot and you buy some boards and you get a hammer and a saw and the tape measure and you set it all there on the workbench and sit there like this, you know what's going to happen? Not really anything. If you have no skills and you decide you're going to take all these things and you're going to make something out of it, the thing that will be made out of it will be directly related to not just the quality of the tools and the materials, but to you, the skills you bring to it. When we start getting into the mind, it starts to get a lot closer to phronesis. In other words, there are moral implications about what's right, not just competence considerations. So all of these things say that there is an interplay between the material, the tool, and the worker. So now the dishonest mistake is to say exactly that's not the case. This this tool is a smart tool. And just like you don't have to tell aspirin, no, it's my left knee, not my right knee. You just take the aspirin, it's all good. A similar assumption is made about these medicines. And just the medicine idea says, down the hatch and forget about it. Right? In other words, the setting relieves us of our responsibility in the interaction. When it's a tool, it underlines the fact that the responsibility is inescapable in this, right? So
It's
so that's the
interesting
setting of
because
the two different worldviews.
unlike aspirin, where you do take it and then you can perfectly well forget about it, you cannot take ibogaine and forget about it. That's
Y
like
y
you're
you're
gonna
likely to
you're gonna have
remember
a
it.
you're gonna
Yeah.
be remembering it for years to come, um, let alone 2 hours later, 2 hours
Well,
after
that
you
gets
ingest it.
into what are the potential personality changes that can actually come about through correctly applied work with these tools, to put it in my worldview.
Well,
And
I
that
think
is t
maybe you'll yet get to this, but just in case it fits here first is in the analogy of Home Depot, um,
uh
can we try to say succinctly what the human is responsible for doing with the tool? Because that's often where we get into pretty subjective territory that
yeah,
the materialist just kind of um, shines on. And I
right,
think that's like if we could get that across to RFK Jr., what's the work being done with the tool?
right.
That
Well,
would
see,
be
here's the thing. Do you want to start from the beginning and reinvent a process? The thing that I always think of in this is kung fu. Uh, if do you think you can go out in your backyard and invent in one lifetime a better kung fu system than one that's actually been credibly developed over 1,500 years? Now, this is
that's
with
one
all the
straw man.
shenanigans and the
Maybe another is can you watch YouTube videos and learn kung fu?
well, and here's the thing, is that the idea is, do we learn from the tradition, or do we decide that we're the ones that know everything already and that all the traditional stuff was superstition and we're going to just push our worldview? And the way I was taught by one of my teachers, they said, either the lineage changes you or you change the lineage. And 99 times out of 100, if you change the lineage, you've damaged it. And that road is called personal deviation. And usually it's because the lineage challenged some aspect of you that you didn't want to face in a genuine or credible way, and so you just took that off the curriculum and just scheduled your way around it, what we often know as spiritual bypassing. This is the basic bypassing phenomenon. Blah 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 blah. I don't want to pay attention to it, right? Well, the thing we need to pay attention to about this is that these lineages were very clear it's not the medicine. There's no lineage that I've ever heard of where they just give you the cup of medicine and go do something else. The West is going to say, well, we're going to take a person and we're going to put them in a classroom and give them a bunch of lectures, and we're going to make them take tests, and we're going to, rate their compliance with our system and their memorization of our textbooks, and then based on that, we're going to decide that this person has the right stuff to be a guide in these other dimensions. That's never been a thing. And that if that tries to become a thing, it will become a not very good, potentially very bad thing.
I mean, the use of the phrase other dimensions, though, kind of gets to this rift also, because I don't think they would say other dimensions.
No.
What would they say? Because that's the gap we need to close.
Well, they would say that this person is going to be there as a safeguard to make sure that this process that we're just going to assume is going to take care of itself. Well, we're going to just make sure they don't run out into the street. And we're going to make sure that that person has taken ethics, medical ethics training so that they don't take advantage of this person while but as far as knowing how to work with this medicine, they're going to know it the way a materialist knows everything, which is to say, from the outside. Because the only way that you learn how to do this is apprenticeship. And you're an apprentice to the medicine as much as you're an apprentice to the maestro. And here's the hard thing: not everybody has the right stuff. Study the history of shamanism. The shamans have always been the exceptions, not the rank and file. When you try to make this into a pharmaceutical intervention and you try to just uh, by decree, by fiat, decide, okay, we're going to allow it. Because now if this is a product, we've got to push this out. We need to get lots of people out there that can serve this nursemaid role so that people can do this, because we got to move these color TVs, right? Today's rock and roll reference. And so what happens is there is an interest by the context to have your standards be minimal, to have your hopes and aspirations for the mechanical materialist intervention to do all the work to be optimal, right? So that you've dialed down the human dimension as much as you can because you want to scale this, and you've dialed up the materialist assumptions to the optimal because you're going to sell that, right? That's the point.
We're
So we've
we're
we've kind of created a setting where we've encouraged the wrong balance of factors here.
we're I hear that, and
I
I
can't see
think
this not happen.
I think two problems are being conflated there, though. One is the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, and what it does with, because of its materialist underpinnings, what it does with interventions in general as a business. But then there's the RFK supporter. I shouldn't say RFK supporter, but the supporter of the use of psychedelics as an intervention without the tradition would then say, let's keep the medical industry out of it. Legalize it, right? Anybody should be able to get it anywhere. You don't need somebody to babysit you. Just sit in your room, do it. You and the medicine will work it out. And
Equals
so
bad, yeah.
that's also not true, right? I mean, some people will get lucky and for sure, the medicine
Well,
will
we
teach
know
you things
we
in
have
many
done enough
cases,
science to know who will get lucky and who will get unlucky.
to some
The
extent, yeah.
people that will tend to get lucky will be the ones that rank high in trait openness and low in trait neuroticism. Ironically, the reason that people come to this as a therapy is usually with the intention of increasing trait openness and increasing, or rather decreasing, neuroticism. The higher you are in neuroticism, the more likely you are to have a negative experience.
I mean, you
The
could say
mo
PTSD is a neurosis.
Yeah, I think that the more you have something to work out, the more you need skills applied to work it out. In other words, it's safest as a medicine maybe for people who really don't need it, and more critical that it be applied correctly in the cases of the people where we really expect some therapeutic outcome to be an improvement, measurable. And there is evidence that when it is successful and it's done correctly, people do come out with higher trait openness to new experience and lower neuroticism. They're better adjusted.
So let's go back to the question about how we talk about what you call different dimensions, which that's lowercase d, right? I don't think we're
Sure.
talking about necessarily experiencing literal dimensions other than the
Right.
four we're hanging out in most of the time. Um, but you're talking about working in the dimension of mind or the dimension of the subjective or and so how would you talk to um, a, an RFK junior or a legislator about what the what the opportunity is, what the risk is, like what are the consequences of
Right.
not paying attention to those dimensions? What do the dimensions consist of in a way that they might understand?
Well, I think that whenever we talk to somebody in government, it goes often without saying that what we're talking about is authorities and structure, or structures and authority, rather. Sorry. Um, and there will be an assumption that, okay, for a metaphor, I'm trying to raise quail now, right? I'm learning about raising quail. I, in the past, have raised 600 chickens. I know a lot about chickens. Do you want to know how much of that applies to quail? Very, very little of it because they're different birds. So while I'm familiar with the bird part of it, I know they both lay eggs. I know they both flap their wings. The idea that authority in one of those areas would make me an expert and authoritative in another area is just silliness. I need to learn that. And what we're likely to see here is they're going to say, okay, we have this new thing. What already existing authority do we put this under? Or another way to say that is, what institutionalized body of completely irrelevant and non applicable knowledge are we going to put this totally new thing of another dimension? Like, we're literally going to put it under people who are absolutely clueless about it as a therapy. Now, there might be people that are very apt with their with understanding neurochemistry and understanding neuropsychology. And when I sit with them next to me in a ceremony that is filled with daimonios and I see that they don't lose their shit, then I'll say, okay, the possibility is that this person has the other capabilities that are necessary and not just the book learning, but it's the idea that I like this idea of the right stuff that we applied to astronauts, right? Well, this is very parallel to that. It's not everybody has the right stuff. Not everybody, because you know what, if we look at an astronaut, there's a certain physical fitness requirement, there's a certain psychological stability requirement, there's a certain educational requirement, right? There's a certain conscientiousness requirement. All of these things have to come together in the right formula. And traditionally, there were ways that the people that had that stood out. And typically, one shaman recognized the next generation of shaman, and that's how that was handed off. Because who knows what the right stuff is? The only person that has a clue of what the right stuff is the last guy that had the right stuff. Yeah. So this idea that, and this is the a version of the problem with authority in government in general, is that people get a type of intoxication with authority, and they all of a sudden think they know shit they don't know. They couldn't know. And honestly, we're not picking the best people by the system that we use in that authority structure. We are picking people who serve the system. We're not picking people who serve the truth. If we decide to do that, then we would realize that taking people from existing authority structures and trying to put them in authority over something that they know nothing about is like taking your sick dog to a front end mechanic. He's great if he's working on your truck. He doesn't know anything about veterinarian medicine. And the assumption that just because he makes your truck run so well that he would know something about veterinary medicine. Hello? It's like if you're living in a simplistic universe where authority is all knowing and you don't want self-responsibility and you just want to give this authority over to the people that will masquerade and prance around with it, okay, then that's where we're going to go. That's the way we do things now. And what's going to happen is you're either going to have a lot of people wash out of that system, or you're going to have a lot of people actually get damaged by it, because these things are, they're not, it's not aspirin. It's not a simple mechanistic issue. It requires insight. It requires all the capacities of another human being developed in a direction to do this job. You know what I saw when I taught in the acupuncture school? A good acupuncturist, this also came out of apprenticeship. You're going to learn to read pulses. Reading pulses is a super subtle thing. And you're going to learn how to read pulses, and you're going to do all this stuff. You're going to have to be an apprentice to someone that knows how to do it, and you're going to have to sit at their side for a while, and you're going to do it. And do you know that the American chiropractors decided that they were going to give themselves the authority to do acupuncture with 100 hours training? Like, why would you trust anybody that's thinking like that? This is just shameless, shameless, shameless profiteerism. If you want to learn how to do something on someone else as a medical professional, go learn how to do it right. And that's like how that attitude expects to stand up under the test of time. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And the acupuncturists, they want to do the same thing. They want to expand their territory, colonize into doing hormone replacement therapy and IVs and things that were never any part of traditional acupuncture. And what that tells me, they want to do that, tells me they probably can't solve the problem using the tools that they came with their tradition, because they probably weren't trained in their tradition well enough.
Yeah, there's
Again,
that,
because
but it's
someone was
also
scaling up and,
I don't know if acupuncturists in China, hundreds of years ago were thinking about, um, business the way that, American acupuncturists do today, and so, there's a blend
they
there that
absolutely were not. In fact, a famous Chinese
culturally
physician named
culturally,
Sun Ta-chun, he wrote a long polemic about how bad it is to do medicine for money in the 1700s. This was not that controversial an idea. I mean, but because it was connected with Buddhism. And that's one of the things you will see in the American traditions of acupuncture. It's been entirely separated from Buddhism. The reason acupuncture uses little needles is because Buddhism said, don't cut the body. That's why there's not surgery traditionally within acupuncture, because Buddhism said, don't do that. Buddhism also says that you address other people's suffering from compassion, not from your own desires. This is endemic. Everybody knows that people that go to be doctors, they go to be doctors because they want to be rich. Like, there might be exceptions to that, but they stand as exceptions pretty much. And so what does that tell us about this tradition? It tells us it's me first, and it's like, well, okay, but at least be upfront about it, you know? And you got the caduceus and everything. Just throw that all away. If you're not going to be responsible to the tradition, then don't masquerade. Just be upfront about it, At least you're honest to some degree. But so that's what we're going to see with psychedelics. We're going to see the same thing. We've got a lineage that has some subtlety, that's
Well,
got a
I think
nuance model.
the question um, ought to be, and maybe we can find a way of posing it constructively.
How do we
Um,
do it right?
how do we do it right, and let's say at scale? Because there's like this inherent problem, that like if we were to say, okay, you have to train as a shaman, you have to apprentice, you have to the shaman you apprentice with has to say, yeah, you did a good job, and you can sit in a room full of demonios and not freak out, and not just not freak out, but work it. Um,
Mhm.
uh, how could government possibly regulate that? And there's a paradox here, because there's a valuable function to regulation, and there's a distortion, that centralizing regulation creates. So,
Yeah.
like, it's good that people have to take a driving test before they
Mhm.
get out on the road. I think that's a good thing, and my parents are in their 90s, and I wish they would be tested more often. Um,
Like,
so, so we can't. I don't think we can, like, realistically say all regulation should go out the window. And if this is going to be legal,
no.
and it should be available to people, this is like powerful medicine. Well, how do we make it legal and regulated and still deal with this, the I guess unregulatability and lack of understanding around it? Like, do you have a vision
Yeah.
for that?
Well, I think that there's 3 steps. The first step is humility, is to realize that this is unlike anything that any of our prior experience has been based on, and we have to have an openness and an understanding instead of a hubris that says that we know all about this when in fact we know very little about it. So we gotta start from a place of humility. And then from that place of humility, when there's some understanding is grasped, then we ask ourselves, now, how do we do this? And once you've got a core of people who have actually learned how to do it, then you could start to address how do we scale it. But you're talking not about scaling therapy, you're talking about scaling an educational program. I mean, I don't have it here. The only college degree I ever got was in shamanism from the University of San Martin, and, I had the certificate out here, my diploma, my marca registrada, but there were people that were right. This is what's so difficult about it, is there were people that were right alongside of me that probably did it as much as I did or maybe more. And somehow it never really opened up to them. And, when I was given the Marca Registrada, uh, most of the things that you learn in ceremony. You usually train, as you know, as an apprentice, you're the sidekick or the helper. And so it's not all on you, but little by little, it starts to be a little more on you. And so you do this kind of a push ups thing through that. Well, some people just never stepped into that. And I remember somebody saying when I was given the rubber stamp, they were saying, "Well, how come I never? I've been doing it longer. How come I didn't get, you know?" And that right there was your answer in a way, was because a part of that, this isn't something that someone does to you or gives to you. This is something that, like kung fu, it's something that you develop through encountering hardship and employing a technology. And not everybody gets good at kung fu. You know, Cho used to say 1 out of 1,000 people is black belt. And, and yet you see how quickly that kind of thing gets counterfeited. And, so, it has to be humility goes along with respect, right? It's like once you're humble, if you're humble enough to understand what's going on, then you're gonna have some respect for the process that the shaman has to go through to be able to use the tool, you know? There's a great video around on the YouTube now of a group of African rebels sitting around a camp, and they got all their AKs laying around, and a chimpanzee is in the camp, and he grabs the AK and empties the magazine around the camp, and everybody's jumping in every direction, right? Somehow that jumps leaps to mind, that image, right? Is it just turns out that he didn't have the right stuff, and a lot of people could have gotten hurt because he was given the technology or was allowed to pick up the technology he did not fully comprehend. And, I mean, another rock and roll reference, Sid Barrett leaps to mind. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. It's not a
Sid Barrett's an
given that
interesting
one's
case
in.
study for, um, using, psychedelics either recreationally or medicinally. I'm sure it was a combination, and it it not having been done with skill, with no education.
Or there was some that this is another thing that people don't understand about these things is that when okay, these other dimensions, since we've already opened up that can of worms, people associate it with healing, but this is like a dimension of mind, and there's all sorts of things that translate across to that dimension. Ayahuasca is used for black magic as easily as it's used for white magic. It's a tool. You can build a house with a hammer or you can hit something in the head with it. Those are two same hammer, right? And the hammer, what does the hammer know? The hammer doesn't know anything. It's all on the person holding the hammer. And so that's why this idea that the hammer does the work is just dangerous and stupid and just completely making assumptions that there hasn't even been the very beginnings of a of a research to try to understand what you've really got, you
It's
know?
interesting, like the advocate of psychedelic medicine, whether they advocate for its regulation or not, um, will say that the analogy of the hammer doesn't work because you can sit in a room with a hammer and be pretty sure nothing will happen if you just sit there, because the hammer won't do anything. But if you ingest a psychoactive medicine, it will absolutely do something, and you can almost count on it, right? So uh, it um, and you've probably had this experience also of the medicine having a will of its own. Um, I I I I think you're kind of making the point, a little black and white, and for good reason, that the tool isn't doing the work, but that's not quite the case in the plant medicine world. The tool is actually doing a lot of work, but it's in harmony with a human being doing work as well. And so the
Maybe at
hammer analogy
heart
starts to break down a little.
maybe a car is a better analogy
Yeah,
because it has its own motive force and it
right.
must be steered and it can run out of control and it can flip over the whole show. So it's true that it will do things, and that's why. I mean, to use the tool idea, shaman have a lot of tools, and it's true that the portiga itself or the medicine is much more dimensional than any of the other things we might call a tool. Tobacco is a tool. Shakapa beads make a certain sound; they're a tool. Different liquids, agua florida, things that we might sopla, blow into the air. Those are all tools. But the porga is really more than just a tool. It's true. It's la maravilla del mundo, right? It's the marvel of the world. And and that's why it must be approached with respect. And
That's such a internal, subjective world, and I've had conversations with people that I've said that to, literally word for word, and they've said, "Pshaw, it's a chemical, it's a substance like any other." And I don't know how to get across to them. I think your argument about, um, the the your initial argument, the honest mistake about thinking of things materially, um, is in the right direction to kind of create context for somebody that has experience with psychedelics and has been changed by psychedelics, but still believes it's fundamentally a chemical thing happening, and has a materialistic view on it, which boggles my mind.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I think we have to try to learn how to make these arguments without kind of doing what I think Ken Wilber would warn us not to do, and or Rousseauian critics, and glorify and mythologize, um, old worldviews and superstition, right? The mythical and magical worldviews, which I think is what we get accused of when we try to make an argument for, uh, um,
For the
valuing
old
the
tradition.
tradition. And I like what you
Yeah.
said about it's not scaling up a technology, it's scaling up an educational model or an educational process. And I feel like there's more to build on there.
Mhm. Well, just the idea of um, valuing the old traditions. I had a chance, Ram Dass and I had a talk about an hour just about this whole topic. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you go to the curanderos in South America? Why didn't you talk to the ayahuasqueros? Because they have an intact hallucinogenic lineage. And he said, we tried. Now this is a Harvard professor who was trying to take a credible, and I know it became maybe controversial from some respects, although hopefully now we can look back in a different way. Um, and he found value in those old traditions. He just couldn't get his hands on them. Right? But they saw the value there. That's why they went to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's why they wanted to talk to the people in India and the Zen masters in Japan and all that, because that information is hard won. And you don't want to have to go through that all again yourself. If we can stand on the shoulders of the giants before us, then we're definitely better off. But the first thing we have to do is be humble enough to admit that somebody might know something more than we know. And we have to stop thinking that these traditional people, one of our companions, was talking with an illiterate Indian guy down in the jungle. And he read this guy a list of 80 herbs that he wanted to see growing in the jungle wild in the Amazon. And he said that this old guy took him on a couple-hour run through the jungle And he said he pointed out every one of these 80 herbs and not an herb that wasn't on the list, and he got everyone on the list. But he's illiterate, right? So this idea that because someone else's cognitive model is so different from ours, there is an inherent hubris in the first world person to assume that their cognitive model is actually the correct one and the other people's is nothing but superstition. And that's just a vast overestimation of your own intelligence and an enormous underestimation of what it took for humanity to actually get to this place. Like, most of us wouldn't make it if we had to face the challenges that our ancestors faced, not just physically, but mentally, both through types of intelligence and types of emotional fortitude. So we shouldn't be too
Not to
quick.
mention speed.
Well, and
Raw speed.
and maybe a certain type of what we used to call, we're back to gumption, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
grit. But
yeah.
I wanted um to try to share another argument I've heard for why we should do away with tradition and let people cultivate their own one-on-one relationships with plant medicine, which acknowledges that there's an element of mind to this or dimensions, but it doesn't acknowledge that tradition is useful for dealing with that. And that argument is that um, the the tradition relies on a pagan worldview, and I'm not using, and they didn't use the word pagan pejoratively, but that thinking of um, the spirit world as this fragmented place um, uh, doesn't work for the post monotheistic worldview or the monotheistic worldview that now exists. That 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 there's an incompatibility between the shamanic um, paradigm, if you will, and the first world. That it actually doesn't take, and I don't know why it would take, at least to some extent, for you and me. But I can see that the lack of openness, or say high neuroticism, might be culturally baked in at this point, also in ways that do make um, plant medicine with tradition incompatible with a modern worldview. What's your reaction to that?
Well, uh, you know, it's difficult. The type of people that make those arguments are typically people who have had no exposure, no personal experience. So what they're actually telling you about is their imagination of what this thing is
I'm
about.
actually thinking of a specific person that says that they've taken LSD. Um, I don't remember if it was dozens of times or hundreds of times, but many times.
Yeah. But without any tradition.
Correct.
Yeah, so they don't know what a tradition would bring them. I know that it took me somewhere between 50 and 60 ceremonies before I got it. And those were ceremonies with someone sitting next to me, largely trying to help me get
Pointing.
it.
Yeah. Look, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so the fact that somebody did psychotourism and came away no smarter than they showed up in the first place does not surprise me at all. I would actually be impressed if it was other than that. Because I did a little bit of psychotourism before I got involved with the lineage. I didn't do, more than everybody else. I didn't do, there's people who did more, there's people who did less. But, I wasn't a complete newbie, but I was what I came later to call a psychotourism. I was a psychotourist in that capacity. And going back, I think I could have done hallucinogens 1,000 times, and I would not have figured out what I was shown in the first 4 or 5 ceremonies. And the same is true with kung fu. The same is true with a lot of lineages. I didn't just pick up a paintbrush. I actually learned and listened to people who had done it before. Why waste time, right? But what the type
It's
of
not
person
just
that
why
you're
waste
talking
time,
with.
it's that there's a transmission, so but what you're basically saying is you can get in as many fights as you want. You're not gonna learn kung fu, even if you start winning fights sometimes.
Oh, yeah,
You'll
yeah,
figure some
exactly.
stuff out, but, um, but you're not getting the kind of, um L what's the word? Like, the step up, the level up that or multiple levels up that a transmission gives you in terms of
Well,
your
and like,
ability to fight.
and to jump across there, what we say in martial arts is we say that the fast beating the slow and the strong beating the weak is not art. That's a state of nature. So there are people that can engage in a lot of fights and they can win because they're bigger or because they're faster. And that's not art. It's, when somebody my size lays hands on somebody who's 8 inches bigger than me and dominates them and throws them out of the place, that's different. When you get an effect that is the result of art and technique and learning rather than just natural capacity, right? And there are some people that will naturally, you know, y- y- let me put it this way. Your brain is is set up to unfold. If things happen to us that damage us, it is within the natural function of your brain to adapt and heal around that and move forward. That is like the great human capacity uh, over other animals, right? Or other brain body arrangements. And so it's natural for you to get over your issues, even without intervention. It's a natural function of the body. Just like you cut yourself, your skin will heal. Uh, so it's not a surprise that some people would, a percentage would actually come to hallucinogens and not have immediately negative experiences. It's more in a case where there's something that really kind of needs to be worked out. And some of that stuff can be more easily worked out if you have somebody who's skilled in these dimensions to help you show you some tricks. And
Well, and not just, I also think without, a lineage, and a teacher, um, you have a pretty good chance of having some level of, spiritual experience, let's say, or experiences that make you aware of patterns and dynamics in your life, in existence that you wouldn't be aware of otherwise. But
Mhm.
that's also not um that that's not a proxy for healing work. And maybe that's what you were getting at with the spiritual bypass comments earlier. But I think a lot of people think you have a spiritual experience and that's what heals you. Do you want to say more about that maybe?
um, well, I mean, I think that I suppose that again, we're dealing with people's imagination and their beliefs and their reactions to what is largely an imaginary thing. When they actually go through the experience, then, uh, there's some there's some sand under that castle, right? And there's or some substance under it. And that and that's why a lot of what I hear about what I translate, for example, when you were talking about some of uh the arguments that people make about it from outside the experience. And what I always hear is defense of a worldview that's held entirely on faith. And they're actually afraid of a possible experience that might show them something that's different than the fantasy that they're inhabiting. And instead of this position of humility or of the Zen master's empty cup, to actually experience it and say what, and to not already be telling yourself what, right? Filling in that space with what you think, which is you could be positive, could be all, oh, it's just going to all be beautiful because I'm told this is so spiritual. And then there you are back in your childhood looking at some abuse and seeing for the first time how that reaction, moved through you. And you're going, holy shit. And this was not the lightness and unicorns and this is, I'm actually having to look at stuff that I've gone through a lot of work to sort of put away and not integrate. And so, it's like you want the truth. Can you handle the truth? Maybe you need to go through a process to stiffen yourself up so that you can handle the truth a little bit. Or maybe there's a training. Maybe you need to know that whatever that everything's okay on some level. And as long as you're still harboring that something's not okay, then there's something to be worked out around that. And again, I think that in this case, the shamans show up as antepasados, people who have passed this pathway before us. Because a shaman is not born a shaman. They might be born with a karma, or the destiny of a shaman, but they're not born with the experience. They actually, at one point, went through their first ceremony and had to go through all their stuff and had to look at so that your experience is going to be uh, my dog yesterday, I think he ate one of these velvet ants, one of the puppies, and his face swelled all up. And it's like, here, I can't really do anything for him. And he's rubbing it on the ground and kind of freaking out, and but then he finally comes to me and he's pushing against me and he's everything. And I figured out how my being with him could somehow make it a little easier until it passed. Could sort of be there with him, even though I'm not having the hard time, he's having the hard time. You could see that somehow my being there, sharing it with him, helped him through it. And that's
I
a
just wanna
lot
make
like what
make
a
it clear,
shaman does.
you're not making an analogy for shamanism in
Well,
that.
I am. I'm saying that
Okay.
I've felt like in ceremonies, for example, on sometimes I feel like that people, some people need to learn how to suffer, and that they just need to suffer through the things that they have upon them that they haven't suffered the other way. Like they say, when you're in hell, keep going. It's like, don't stop there. It's a process. You can push through this. And so sometimes someone else there who recognizes this, who has pushed through it, can be there and say, okay, this is the part where you push through it. Almost like a midwife. That's what Plato said, is that he was like a midwife, someone that's there to go, no, push now, push. You can
I
do
just
this,
I
push.
I just don't want our listeners to get the impression that that's the extent of the shaman's role, which I know you don't believe.
Oh, well, no, of course not. But I'm saying
Okay.
that from their seat, they can see that maybe going through some of these things that they felt was very personal and their own difficulty that they were stuck with as if only they knew what this was. A shaman can, if a correctly trained one in the right circumstances, when well dignified, that is honest and engaged in curanderismo and is a positive brujo, can actually share that psychic space with you a little bit in a quasi telepathic way and help you see a way through it by their seeing a way through it, by their having been there. You know, it's like I might have told the story about the old man that plowed horses. Did we talk about that? And he got a horse that was wild, and he harnessed it in next to two 25-year-old huge Bergeron horses that were so calm, that were so stable, that he just vibed in with them and he was chill. Well, somebody that has that kind of psychic mass can help you when your boat is, splashing in the water. You can maybe make it through the rapids if you tie up with them in their bigger boat that's been through these rapids a lot, and you can see, oh yeah, look what he does with the oar. I guess that helps here, and uh but it's a process. And it's a process of you getting empowered. It's not a process of do it to me, go, like you go to the dentist, you pull the tooth out, or you do the surgery, put me away and I'll wake up when it's all done. This is exactly not that. This is the doctor that helps you get more aware, less anesthetized, and helps you through the experience that goes along with that. And of course, a shaman does much more than that. But as far as that personal relationship and the thing that I don't think somebody could do just from reading a textbook and attending lectures, I don't think you'd learn that way. I don't think you would get the ballast in your boat because you did well on the quiz on chapter 6. Like these are not, because what we're talking about is dispositional, and an educational system that is focused on propositional knowledge has a difficult time communicating dispositional achievement, right? Because you got to go through it. You have to actually attain the disposition. You have to know, you have to get to where you make good wheels, like Chuang's wheel maker. I don't know any way other than the traditional way. I mean, I think that if the traditions could have found a way to do it easier or better, or that way that made it accessible to everybody, which it just isn't, they probably would have done that over the 10,000-year direct connected lineage that they say they have with this.
Before
So,
we end here, Brian, I'm wondering if you want to say something directly to RFK Jr. and then we can try to get it in front of him.
well, I mean, I think the thing is that we just can't do these things glibly. There's a great, great potential benefit here, but it's something that we have to grow into. There's no fast solution. It's not a magic bullet. It's like we have to learn our way into this. But you want to know what? This is something that America could lead the world in. I remember my teacher down in South America. He said his South American students went at this pace and his American students went at this pace. Now, he might have had some incentive to tell us that, of course. But, uh, and, I titled out there, see, I guess he wrote a book and it's out there, Dr. Jorge Gonzalez Ramirez. And there's some YouTube videos, I think, of him now out there you can find. But, uh, uh, yeah, I mean, I think that there's great potential here, but we just don't want to be too simplistic in our thinking about these things. We need to learn what's there and build on what the human race has already learned. And our hubris is definitely a roadblock to that. And this is a whole other thing than we are used to doing. Educationally, it's a whole other thing. Therapeutically, it's a whole other thing. Medically, it's a whole other thing. And you uh, you have to change the way of thinking to get a different result out of it, or else we're just going to make it into all the stuff that we already have, which is to say, you're going to have people thinking that they do it once or twice, and all of a sudden, lifetimes of trauma are gonna melt away. It's like, no, there's a mechanism to how the universe works. There's a mechanism to how humans work, and these things kinda have to work out according to those mechanisms. And it is definitely a doable thing, but we can't be naive. That's the word I'm looking for. Let's not be naive. And let's, do the hard work and do it right. And this used to be the American way, right? And that we're willing, we know that I was just watching something about how quickly the American army learned in World War II after they got their asses handed to them at Kasserine Pass. And the other world powers thought, well, those are the Americans. We won't see them again. They're out the game now. We just took all their chips, and it was quite a surprise to see Americans come back the way they did because they learned. They navigated a learning curve faster than anybody thought they could. And we can do that if we don't let the impulses of our lower nature win out. We can't give this into greed. Let me just say, give into greed around this and you will get slapped down. I have seen that enough. There is a mechanism here. One tries to lower the vibration of this at one's own risk. And I said people do this for black magic. I didn't say that they came out with happy and fulfilled lives as a result of that, right? Uh, you gotta do things right, you know? Another great rock and roll reference from Genesis, right? Dance on a volcano. The top of this hill is the edge of the world, and if you're going to pass, you better start doing it right. Great song.
Cool. Good. Well, let's see what he does.
Yeah, yeah. More power to doing it right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Cool. Oh, and also just a housekeeping note, we finished with Henri Bergson and his creative evolution on the audio bookshelf, and I think I will be starting I was doing them releasing them both on the weekend, and I think I'm gonna try to do the book in the middle of the week and the episode on the weekends, and so I think the next book, which actually inspired me to do the audio bookshelf, I think is gonna be is that backwards?
No.
John Dewey,
Sure.
The Quest for Certainty.
Cool.
John Dewey, psychologist, educator, and pragmatist philosopher of co-conspirator, brother in arms with William James, the father of American psychology, writer of the first psychology textbook at Harvard University. Who we also will get into because this is kind of it's interesting the role that Americans play in the story of philosophy and in general, and particularly in these recent, Thoreau and Forward, which is all these cats that we're talking about. So, so yeah, look forward to that.
Very well. Take care, Brian.
We'll see you next time. Bye bye.